I walked into the conference room that morning feeling more excited than nervous. I had spent weeks refining the pitch. Every number, every slide, every potential objection memorized. My idea wasn't flashy, it was practical, scalable, something investors could actually trust. But as soon as I started presenting, the intern, a smug kid named Darren, rolled his eyes and laughed, right there, in front of the entire team. "Seriously, that's your idea?" he said, smirking like he owned the place. I froze for a fraction of a second, my blood boiling, but I kept my voice calm, measured. I finished the pitch, but I could feel the laughter echoing in my ears, the team glancing nervously, unsure where to look. After the meeting, my manager patted Darren on the back, complimented his critical thinking, and ignored my work completely. I left that room fuming, replaying his laughter over and over. That night, I reviewed the pitch deck again, not just to fix flaws, but to turn it into something untouchable, something no one could ignore. I dug into investor trends, market gaps, competitor failures, and feedback from previous pitches. I realized Darren's arrogance was my opportunity. The more he underestimated me, the more leverage I had. I started documenting every idea, every angle, every potential objection with airtight data. I even mapped out how to subtly borrow the parts of the presentation Darren thought were funny and make them seem revolutionary. I wasn't just planning revenge, I was planning a performance that would make him irrelevant in front of everyone who mattered. Then I got a tip. The investors for our next pitch were not only tech-focused, but had a soft spot for bold, creative ideas executed flawlessly. I realized I could redesign the pitch not just for logic, but for spectacle, confidence, and authority. I stayed late in the office that week, reworking slides, recording mock presentations, and rehearsing every line until it sounded effortless. I even practiced the moments where Darren's smirk would appear in my mind, preparing my own reactions to make him look petty, small, inconsequential. The key was subtlety. I had to make it feel accidental, as if his ego would implode without seeing me push a single button. The day of the pitch arrived. Darren, of course, strutted in like he owned the room. I kept my calm, my posture perfect, my slides ready. The investors were early, talking among themselves, casually scanning emails and portfolios, unaware they were about to witness a masterclass. Darren jumped in first, presenting a brilliant idea that had no numbers, no risk analysis, no execution plan. He used buzzwords and gestures, and some investors nodded politely, too polite to embarrass him. I stayed silent, letting the illusion play out, letting the tension build. When it was my turn, I walked in with confidence, smiling faintly at Darren as if nothing had happened. I launched into the presentation, starting with a simple, relatable story, moving into a series of data points that immediately grabbed attention, then unveiling a visual prototype that made the concept tangible. The room shifted, energy turning toward me. Every slide was layered, every argument preempted criticism, every demonstration made Darren's idea look shallow. I even used a strategic line Darren had mocked weeks earlier, but framed it with execution details, making it seem visionary. Investors leaned forward, phones out, nodding in agreement. Darren noticed it too, his smirk fading, replaced with subtle panic. I could see it in his eyes, the recognition that I wasn't just competing, I was outperforming in every measurable way. He tried to interject once, but I smoothly incorporated his interruption into the narrative, redirecting the focus, making him appear disruptive rather than clever. I finished, paused, let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, and then the room erupted in questions I had anticipated and answered before they could even ask. I handed out a one-page summary with projections, ROI, and implementation plan, and watched as the investors passed it around, nodding in impressed agreement. After the pitch, Darren stumbled over his words, trying to reclaim attention, but every attempt fell flat. Investors were asking me to schedule follow-ups, meeting requests, invitations to private sessions. I walked out of the room, heart pounding, but the satisfaction was not in winning alone. It was in watching Darren realize that his laughter had become the fuel that made my victory undeniable. The next morning, news started spreading internally. Emails circulated about the successful pitch, the $10 million commitment, the impressed investors. Darren tried to claim partial credit, but the presentation deck, emails, and investor notes all pointed to my execution. My manager, who had ignored my previous efforts, now asked for a full briefing. I smiled politely and walked them through every strategic decision, leaving Darren squirming in the background. It wasn't mean-spirited, it was justice. I noticed whispers around the office, colleagues acknowledging my competence with a mix of admiration and envy. Even Darren's closest allies seemed to shrink away, realizing that arrogance alone wouldn't carry the day. I didn't gloat, I didn't need to. My results spoke louder than any words. I took meetings with investors personally, scheduling one-on-one calls to answer questions, solidifying trust, and subtly highlighting the thoughtfulness and depth of my planning compared to the shallow humor Darren had displayed. By the end of the week, I had signed preliminary agreements that guaranteed $10 million in funding. Investors mentioned my composure, my anticipation of questions, my ability to turn a potential disaster into a show of authority. Darren avoided eye contact, and I finally felt the release of weeks of tension, the humiliation, the laughter, the dismissal. Every late night, every plan, every simulation had culminated in a clean, undeniable victory. The sweetest moment came when our CEO called a company-wide meeting to discuss the successful pitch. Darren tried to speak first, but I was asked to summarize the results. I delivered every detail, every number, every acknowledgement to my team, and then quietly let the board highlight the investors' excitement. Darren sat, silent, exposed, a cautionary tale of arrogance and underestimating someone driven by quiet determination. Weeks later, the investment was finalized. I had negotiated terms favorable not only to my project but to my credibility and influence in the company. Darren, once brash and mocking, now avoided meetings where I was present. My reputation was untouchable, not because I humiliated him publicly, but because I executed flawlessly, turning his laughter into leverage. The project launched, the product exceeded projections, and the company celebrated our team's success. Darren approached me once, awkwardly, trying to justify his earlier behavior, but I smiled politely and focused on the launch metrics, ignoring his words entirely. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had mocked my idea, yet without me, the project would have floundered. I had turned every ounce of derision into motivation, every laugh into fuel. That night, sitting in my office and reviewing investor emails, I realized something. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about strategy, patience, and execution. I had crafted the perfect pitch, leveraged every mistake Darren had made, and emerged not just victorious, but respected, trusted, and influential. And the kid who laughed at me, he became a footnote in a story I wrote with meticulous care. A story of quiet, unstoppable corporate revenge.